Say hi to the crows." His breath was hot against my ear, and before I could gasp or even take one step back, his hands pressed hard into my shoulder and sent me flying off the cliff's edge. The world spun, the rocks and ocean below rushing upward in a blur. The old wound in my leg screamed with pain, useless, unable to fight gravity. The wind tore at my face, my chest, my hair, and all I could think in that endless second was that my own blood had brought a traitor into this family. I felt weightless, abandoned to the abyss, and a bitter taste of betrayal filled my mouth stronger than the salt of the sea. I did not even scream, for the shock stole every sound from my throat. I thought of my daughter, of how she believed his smile, how she defended his every word. She had no idea that the man she loved was nothing more than a snake dressed in silk. The cliff swallowed me, the sky vanished above, and I felt the cold arms of the ocean waiting. Yet even as darkness closed around me, something deep inside whispered not yet. I was not finished. The fall was brutal, but destiny had not chosen this place as my grave. Just minutes earlier we had been together at the villa on the island, the sea breeze sliding in through open windows, laughter floating from the dining room where the others lingered. He turned to me with a polished smile and said we should take a short walk, that a little movement would help my stiff legs recover. My daughter, always eager to see good intentions in him, clapped her hands gently and agreed that it was thoughtful of her husband. I rose slowly, my cane tapping against the polished stone, my body still tender from old injuries, and I felt his hand at my elbow guiding me outward. The path wound toward the cliffs where waves struck the rocks below with a relentless roar. My chest tightened. There was something in the way his eyes flickered, too quick, too bright, as if a plan was already playing behind them. I sensed danger, but I silenced it, telling myself not to be paranoid. The sunlight fell across the jagged rocks, and for a moment it was almost beautiful. Then we reached the narrowest point, the ground crumbling at the edge. I turned to steady myself, but he leaned in, too close, the smile sharpening into something else. I never expected he would choose this very place, this very instant when my guard was lowered, to reveal what he truly was. The sea did not welcome me gently. When my body hit the water, every nerve screamed, every breath was stolen, and for one endless moment I was certain that my son-in-law's wish had come true. But destiny had other plans. Strapped tight against my wrist, my Apple Watch detected the violent fall, the sudden stop of motion, and without my touch, it triggered fall detection. An SOS signal shot into the air, carrying my exact location across satellites and into the hands of strangers I had never met. Below the cliff, a small wooden boat rocked against the dark swells. The fishermen were simple men, hardened by salt, weather, and hunger, their nets heavy with squid. They saw a shape fall from the sky and crash into their catch, tangling among ropes and creatures still writhing. They shouted, first in fear, then in urgency. Hands grabbed, ropes strained, and the deck tilted, but they would not let the sea take me. The net lifted with a violent spray, and my body came with it, limp and heavy. I remember fragments, the glow of a lantern swinging in the storm, a knife cutting the net free, rough palms pressing against my chest, voices urging me to breathe. Salt water gushed from my lungs in a burning cough, then the darkness claimed me again. I lay against the boards of the boat, wrapped in a coarse blanket that smelled of fish and smoke. I was alive, but only barely, my pulse faint yet stubborn. The men whispered prayers, not knowing who I was or what betrayal had thrown me to the sea. To them, I was only a life rescued from death. To me, this was something else entirely. I had been erased from my family's eyes, written off as gone forever, but in truth, I was beginning again. The fall had not ended me. It had given me time, and time would become my greatest weapon. When my eyes fluttered open, the ceiling above me was made of rough wood, swaying with the rhythm of the waves. My chest ached, every breath heavy, but life had not left me. A fisherman bent over, his face lined and kind, and he asked if I could speak. My voice came as a whisper, raw but steady. I told him the only thing that mattered. Do not let anyone know I am alive. His brow furrowed in confusion, but he nodded slowly, sensing the gravity of my plea. I repeated it with a firmness that left no room for doubt. At the small harbor clinic, I insisted they write only that an unidentified woman had been pulled from the sea. No names, no address, no history. I watched the nurse hesitate, then shrug, agreeing to leave the paperwork blank except for the word survivor. Word would travel quickly otherwise, and I could not risk it. To my family, to my daughter, and the man who pushed me, I was gone. They would already be weaving stories of grief, preparing to divide what they believed was theirs. Let them. Their certainty was the trap I needed. The shock of my absence was not a defeat but an unexpected gift. In silence, hidden behind the walls of anonymity, I held the advantage. A ghost cannot be watched, cannot be questioned, cannot be stopped. They thought the sea had swallowed me. Instead, it had given me cover. I was invisible to them now, free to move, free to plan, free to decide the moment when the dead would walk back into their lives. I was not always a woman who walked with a cane and lived under suspicion of her own family. Once I was the force behind a mining empire, a company I built from dust and ambition, from contracts signed in sweat and nights spent poring over ledgers when others slept. When I finally sold it, I did not chase yachts or ballrooms. I took what mattered most to me, my private reserve of gold, 250 million in bars marked with serial numbers as unique as fingerprints. They were not trophies to display but anchors of security. I placed them under a bailment contract with a vault in Switzerland, where every entry required verification, every movement demanded two sets of approvals and codes that only I controlled. I paid for private insurance, not trusting vague promises but holding policies that named me directly, covering each bar by its number. I learned long ago that quiet wealth was stronger than noisy riches. Quiet wealth did not draw thieves to your door or flatterers to your table. Quiet wealth slept soundly under lock and watch, waiting only for my decision. I never flaunted it, never spoke of it at charity dinners or garden parties. To the world, I was comfortable but ordinary. Only I knew that my security was written in gold, resting beneath mountains and ocean away. I never saw it as greed. It was survival, a lifetime of labor condensed into something solid I could trust when people failed. I told myself often I did not guard gold. I guarded my soul, and I would never let careless hands touch it. 1 year ago, I sat across the mahogany desk of my attorney, a man who had seen too many fortunes devoured by greedy hands. He told me plainly that love did not protect wealth, that only structure and foresight could. At his urging, I created the Nevada Dynasty Trust, a fortress in legal form. Its language was cold, but its strength was iron. The spendthrift clause ensured that no heir could ever pledge my gold against their debts or gamble it away in reckless ventures. The no contest clause warned them like a blade at their throat: challenge this trust, and you forfeit everything. But it was the suspicious death trigger that gave me the deepest comfort. If my life ended under unnatural shadows, the trust would freeze, lock itself tight, and direct every ounce of value to charity until an investigation cleared the air. It meant that even in death, I could not be robbed by schemes disguised as mourning. I remember pressing my initials at the bottom of the document, the pen trembling not from doubt, but from the weight of what I was securing. 250 million in gold bars was no longer simply wealth. It became a wall, a bulwark between me and anyone who thought age or frailty made me an easy target. I walked away that day feeling lighter, though the vault in Switzerland remained heavy with gold. The trust was invisible to the world, yet stronger than steel. I told myself if anyone ever dreamed of pushing me aside, they would find only a locked door and a legal snare that could strangle their ambitions before they even began. My daughter had always been tender-hearted, too gentle for the world of wolves I had navigated all my life. She looked at her husband with a devotion that blinded her, convinced he was a genius of investments, a man who could turn risks into gold. When she came to me with papers in hand, she spoke with the eagerness of a child trying to please both sides. "Mother, sign this," she would say. "It is only a small tax optimization. He explained it will help secure your estate." Her eyes glowed with trust, but I saw only the reflection of his lies. The documents bore signatures too perfect, seals that looked fresh from a printer, but she never noticed. She believed in the illusion he fed her, an illusion polished with charming words and a tailored suit. Each time I refused, she sighed with disappointment, thinking I was stubborn, thinking I could not recognize progress. In truth, she could not recognize manipulation. She was not malicious. She was drowning in the web of a man who thrived on control. I watched her defend him at family dinners, watched her laugh at his empty jokes, and I felt the sting not of betrayal from her, but of sorrow. She was caught in his current, carried away from the shore of reason. I told myself she was not my enemy. She was a victim, her strings pulled by the man she thought was her savior. And the cruelest cut was knowing that when he chose to strike me, she would never see his hand until it was far too late. Behind his polished smile and practiced charm, my son-in-law was drowning. The world of easy money he had flaunted so confidently collapsed around him the moment crypto markets crumbled and his leveraged stock bets turned to ash. Margin calls arrived like wolves at the door, demanding more collateral than he could ever provide. Private lenders, men who did not write contracts but carved them into flesh, pressed harder, sending him messages that promised ruin within 72 hours. He wore his suit still, but beneath the fabric he was nothing but fear and desperation. In his frantic mind there was only one path to survival. He convinced himself I still held the ledger, the golden key to a fortune he thought could be seized in an instant. He never imagined that layers of law and trust had already removed it from reach. To him, the math was simple. If I vanished, my daughter would inherit. If she inherited, he would control it. He mistook inheritance for ownership, mistook my age for weakness, mistook my silence for ignorance. Every glance he gave me carried calculation. Every smile hid a countdown ticking inside his chest. I could see the edges of his mask fraying, the tremor in his voice when creditors called, the forced laughter he used to reassure my daughter. He believed the gold was within his grasp, glittering just beyond my hand, waiting for him to take it. But greed always blinds more than it reveals. He forgot I had built empires before he had learned to tie his tie. They thought the treasure lay exposed, ready to be stolen. What they did not know was that I had prepared my defenses long before their hunger began to grow. He came to me with a folder tucked under his arm, his tone sweet, his smile polished. "Mother," he said smoothly, "these are just banking forms, simple authorizations so I can manage your gold more efficiently." He placed the papers on my table as though they were harmless, nothing but routine. My daughter, standing behind him with shining eyes, urged me with a pleading voice, "Mother, just sign. He knows how to protect everything." She looked at me with trust that belonged to him, not me. I opened the folder slowly, my fingers grazing the cheap paper. The print was uneven, the font mismatched, and the notary seal bore a name I had never seen before. I felt the sting of suspicion, sharp as a blade beneath my ribs. Still, I let my hand tremble, let my body sag in the chair, playing the part of an old woman too tired to question. I asked soft, hesitant questions, making him think he had almost won. He leaned closer, answering with rehearsed confidence, his hand resting on my daughter's shoulder, as if to remind me of the loyalty he believed he owned. I nodded faintly, murmuring that I would consider. In truth, I was memorizing every flaw, every false detail, each proof of his deceit. I let him leave that day believing I might bend. I watched my daughter follow him out, her head tilted in blind devotion. I knew then that to stop him, I would have to pretend longer, sink deeper into this role he expected of me. Only by seeming fragile could I see the trap he built, and only by seeing it could I find the moment to turn it back against him. One evening as I passed the study, I caught his voice carrying through the half-closed door. He was on the phone, his tone clipped, professional, and I heard two words that froze me in place: beneficiary, policy. My stomach tightened. I knew the language of finance too well to dismiss it. Later that night, when the house was quiet, I searched through the stack of mail left carelessly on the console table. There it was, a glossy envelope from an insurance company I had never dealt with. Inside, the policy was clear, written in sterile lines of legal ink. The insured was me. The beneficiary, my daughter. The value, tens of millions, a sum large enough to tempt even the most righteous soul, let alone a man drowning in debt. My hands trembled, but not with weakness, with fury. He had purchased a path that turned my breath into his profit, that transformed my survival into his liability. I folded the paper back into its envelope and replaced it exactly as I had found it. No one must know I had seen. My daughter, poor child, would only believe he was protecting our family. She would never question why her husband needed her mother's life covered for a fortune. But I knew. This was no safety net. It was preparation, a contract waiting to be cashed in by tragedy. My supposed accident would not just remove me, it would deliver him wealth disguised as grief. Standing in the silence of my own home, I realized my death had already been written into a business plan. The fracture inside my family widened with every passing day. My daughter, once so close to me, now stood like a shield in front of her husband. "Mother," she would sigh, "you always doubt him. You have to learn to let go." Her words cut deeper than she knew. I did not answer with anger. I swallowed my grief, holding it in silence, because silence gave me space to observe. From that quiet vantage point, I saw how carefully he wove his net around her. Little by little, he took hold of every string. Her salary account, once separate, was now joined to his. Her credit cards, once in her purse, now carried his charges, his indulgences disguised as family expenses. Even her jewelry, small heirlooms I had given her, had been appraised and pledged as collateral without her knowledge. She believed they were planning for a brighter future together. I saw only chains tightening around her wrists. I watched him intercept calls from her bank, whisper explanations she never questioned, and every time she smiled at him with trust, I felt the sting of helplessness. Yet I knew I could not show my hand too soon. If I challenged him openly, she would only defend him more fiercely, blind to the trap she was already in. So I bit back my words and stored away the evidence. Each detail was a thread, and I was weaving them into my own net, one strong enough to catch him when the time came. That night the house was quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against the walls after everyone had gone to bed. I moved through the hallway and noticed a faint glow spilling from the study. His laptop was open, carelessly left behind, the screen still alive. I should have walked away, but something pulled me closer. My eyes scanned the document and my blood turned cold. It was a draft contract with the bank, requesting a withdrawal of gold bars. At the bottom was my name, my signature, written with a precision that mimicked me, but was not mine. The forged curve of the letters screamed betrayal. Next to it was another file, a spreadsheet labeled Debt Repayment, 72H Deadline. I clicked, and rows of names filled the screen, each one a creditor, each line paired with a figure that climbed into the millions. The final column bore interest rates so savage they were nothing short of extortion. My heart pounded, not from fear for myself, but from the clarity of his desperation. He was cornered, caged by debts, his empire of illusions collapsing. And in his twisted reasoning, my life had become the currency that could buy him freedom. I closed the laptop gently, leaving no trace of my discovery, though inside I was burning with rage. I returned to my room and sat in the dark, the hum of the night surrounding me. He thought he was the predator and I the prey. But I had learned long ago that survival required more than strength. It demanded patience and cunning. Let him believe I was blind. Let him continue weaving his trap. I would wait, watching from the shadows, storing every thread of evidence. I knew then the game had begun, and sometimes the only way to win is to pretend you have already lost. Back in the present, the house was lit with the warm glow of chandeliers, yet the air carried the sharpness of deceit. My son-in-law moved quickly, arranging a gathering that masqueraded as a moment of mourning but felt more like a private celebration. Crystal glasses clinked, wine poured, and he raised his glass with the smile of a man who believed his debts had vanished along with me. To the family seated around the long dining table, he performed grief with theatrical precision. His voice dropped, heavy with sorrow, as he spoke. "Mother slipped," he said. "Her foot gave way, and I stood helpless, unable to save her." The words trembled just enough to convince. My daughter pressed her face into his shoulder, her sobs muffled against the fabric of his suit. She clung to him as if he were the last solid ground left to her, and he held her with one hand while lifting his glass with the other. The relatives nodded solemnly, their expressions painted with pity, but none noticed the glimmer of triumph that flashed behind his eyes when he thought no one was watching. For him, this was not tragedy. It was relief, the illusion of deliverance from the chains of creditors. And for my daughter, it was devastation, her heart anchoring her deeper to the very man who had orchestrated the loss she mourned. While glasses still clinked and false condolences circled the room, another message was already moving quietly through the channels of law. My attorney, Richard, a man who understood caution better than comfort, acted the moment news of my so-called death reached his desk. He issued a formal notice to every custodian, every institution tied to my fortune. Effective immediately, the Nevada Dynasty Trust had entered protective mode. The words were cold, clinical, yet their meaning was devastating for the man who thought he had won. Every gold bar, every account, every investment line was sealed. No withdrawals permitted, no pledges accepted. The vault in Switzerland froze access, the compliance officers instructed to treat every attempt as suspicious until further investigation. The accounts in New York and Zurich flickered red across their screens, unmovable, unreachable. What he expected to inherit slid through his fingers like smoke. At the dining table, he continued his performance of grief, but his phone buzzed quietly with denials, rejections, warnings. His smile stiffened, his hand tightened on the glass, yet he dared not show the panic rising behind his eyes. The wall he had never imagined now stood before him, ironclad and unyielding. He had plotted against my body, but he had forgotten I had fortified my wealth long before he ever entered this family. His tragedy was that while he buried me in words, the law resurrected my power. The trust, not his charm, controlled everything, and the door he thought would open had slammed shut with the finality of steel. Desperation drove him to act quickly. While his wife wept in mourning black, he slipped away to place hushed calls to the bank, his voice lowered yet urgent. He demanded access to the vault, insisting that as son-in-law he could arrange an early withdrawal of gold bars. For a moment he believed his charm would carry him through, but the line on the other end remained firm. The request triggered an immediate hold under anti-money laundering and compliance protocols. The officer explained, in words that chilled him, that the gold was no longer freely available. A month earlier, I had signed a forward contract with Sovereign Mint, committing part of my reserve into a binding sale. The bars were locked, their movement restricted until the contract settled. Every serial number was tagged, every transfer cross-checked by auditors in Zurich and Geneva. Nothing could be touched without layers of approvals. He argued, he begged, but each answer was the same. The vault was not his to enter, the gold not his to touch. He left the office with sweat on his collar, phone heavy in his hand, the taste of panic dry in his mouth. He had imagined the fortune opening to him like a treasure chest. Instead, he slammed into a wall of law, compliance, and foresight that I had built long before his debts began to drown him. His plan was crumbling, and though he would not admit it, he felt the first true tremor of fear. He thought he had finally cornered victory. From my study, he had slipped a folder weeks earlier, believing it was the master key to the vault. Inside was a neatly printed list of gold bar serial numbers, each row precise, each figure stamped with official-looking marks. He clutched that paper as though it were salvation, carrying it into a quiet meeting with a banker he called his friend. With false confidence, he spread the list across the desk and demanded confirmation, ready to boast that his fortune was within reach. The compliance officer scanned the sheet, his eyes narrowing before curling into a smirk. "These numbers do not exist in our system," he said flatly, pushing the papers back with two fingers. The silence that followed cracked open something inside my son-in-law. His mouth opened, but no words came. In that moment, the truth hit him harder than any debt collector could. What he had stolen was nothing more than bait. I had left that folder in plain sight months earlier, a decoy designed to lure out greed. Every serial on that list was invented, a phantom record meant to protect the real treasure. He sat frozen, his pulse pounding, his face pale beneath the banker's indifferent stare. All the pathways he had imagined now closed in front of him, one after another, until only dead ends remained. He left the office with the useless paper crumpled in his hand, the weight of his mistake heavier than the gold he would never touch. The fisherman left me in a quiet village far from the city, a place where no one asked questions and names were easily forgotten. I lived in a small room above a harbor shop, the window facing the endless tide. Each day I wrapped myself in plain clothes, blending into the rhythm of strangers, never revealing who I was. In that stillness, I found the chance to act. I borrowed a phone from the shopkeeper and dialed the one number I trusted. Richard answered, his voice steady as ever, though I could hear the shock when he realized I was alive. I told him everything in short, sharp words. The push at the cliff, the insurance policy, the forged papers. He did not gasp or curse. He simply began to plan. Through encrypted channels he gathered files, clips, and bank records. The Apple Watch had preserved a fragment of audio, those poisonous words whispered before I fell. He promised to secure it. He traced the notary fraud, the fake signatures, the shell accounts linked to my son-in-law's debts. Each piece of evidence became a stone in the wall I was building against him. I felt my body still aching, the bruises dark along my skin, but my mind grew sharper with every revelation Richard shared. Survival alone was no longer enough. I wanted justice, and more than that, I wanted the truth revealed so no one could mistake who had betrayed me. In the quiet of that hidden room, I began to understand. My disappearance was not a curse. It was an advantage. From the shadows, I could see the board clearly, and for the first time, I was ready to turn the game in my favor. Richard moved swiftly, his methods precise, leaving no gaps for excuses. The first piece of evidence was the most damning, the recording saved in my Apple Watch. Clear as daylight, my son-in-law's voice whispered those words, "Say hi to the crows," just seconds before the impact. The audio carried not only his intent, but the exact timestamp, synchronized with my fall. Alongside it, Richard extracted geodata from my phone and Apple Health. The coordinates placed me on the cliff at the very moment the device registered a violent drop in altitude and heart rate. Technology had become the silent witness he could never silence. Then came the forged contracts. Richard compared my authentic signatures with the ones submitted to the bank, the ink too uniform, the seal from a notary who had long lost his license. Fraud was written in every line. Finally, the betrayal of flesh and desire. Photos of him with a mistress in a downtown hotel, time stamped to the same nights he told my daughter he was working late. Messages filled with desperate pleas to creditors bled across the screen, promises he could not keep, deadlines marked in red. In those digital ruins, his mask dissolved. He was not a grieving husband, not a loyal son-in-law, but a man cornered, reckless, and exposed. Piece by piece, Richard built the arsenal, and I watched with grim satisfaction. It was no longer my word against his charm. It was evidence against lies, proof against performance. The net was tightening, and I knew when it closed there would be no escape for him. Richard understood that to defeat my son-in-law, we needed more than proof of betrayal. We needed leverage. Quietly, he arranged for a shell company, what lawyers call a special purpose vehicle, to buy out the private loans that had been strangling him. The creditors, eager to recover anything from a desperate borrower, sold the debts at a discount. Within days, every dollar he owed was no longer to faceless lenders, but to me, hidden behind corporate walls. He had no idea that the hand now holding his contracts was the very one he had tried to erase. Then Richard filed a UCC-1 lien, a legal claim that announced to the world that his business assets, his shares, even his office furniture, were pledged against these debts. It meant he could not sell or borrow against anything without first satisfying the lien holder. Overnight, his position inverted. He had imagined himself inheriting millions, striding into boardrooms with new power. Instead, he discovered he was bound, every path locked by paperwork and law. His company, once the stage for his vanity, was now collateral under my control. He thought he would rise above me by removing me. Instead, he had fallen below, chained as my debtor. The irony was sharp and cruel, and it tasted sweeter than gold. Richard's next move struck with the precision of a blade. He petitioned the court for a temporary restraining order, a legal freeze that halted every asset under my son-in-law's and even my daughter's joint control. The grounds were clear and devastating: fraud and attempted homicide. Within hours, bank accounts were locked, credit lines suspended, and properties flagged against sale. The man who once flaunted control suddenly could not access a single dollar without a judge's eye upon him. At the same time, the Nevada Dynasty Trust activated its harshest safeguards. The Slayer statute declared that anyone involved in the death of the grantor would be disinherited automatically. Alongside it, the Bad Acts Clause swept broader, striking out any heir who aided, abetted, or concealed such crimes. It meant that even whispers of complicity could erase their claims. But for my daughter, Richard and I carved a narrow path. In a sealed letter of wishes addressed to the trustee, I had written that if she chose to cooperate with the investigation and cut ties with her husband, she would still receive an independent stipend, enough for her to live freely without fear. If she refused, if she clung to him despite the evidence, her benefits would be suspended indefinitely. It was not cruelty, but mercy disguised as choice. I could not save her blind devotion, but I could offer her a door away from his shadow. And with each measure, the net tightened, the walls closed, and the empire of lies he had built was collapsing into dust. A few days later, the family gathered in the grand living room, the heavy drapes drawn and the chandelier glowing above like a silent witness. The air was thick with whispered condolences, and the faint rustle of papers shuffled across the table. My son-in-law sat at the head as though the seat belonged to him, his expression solemn but his eyes glittering with anticipation. He cleared his throat and spoke with practiced authority. "I will safeguard the estate in her memory," he declared, painting himself as the dutiful heir. My daughter sat close by, her face pale with grief, clutching his arm as if his presence was the only thing keeping her upright. She nodded at every word he said, her trust in him unshaken despite the storm beneath. The relatives began to murmur about villas, investment accounts, and the vault of gold they believed waited to be unlocked. Voices overlapped, some calculating aloud, some suggesting divisions that revealed more greed than mourning. No one questioned his right to speak. To them, I was gone, and the future of my fortune was already a matter of negotiation. I could almost hear the walls of that room absorbing their eagerness, their certainty that my life's work now lay open before them like a feast. They thought the game was finished. They thought the widow was buried with her secrets. But as I listened from the shadows of my own silence, I knew that the moment they believed themselves strongest was the very moment they were most vulnerable. The debate in the room swelled to its peak, voices overlapping with greed disguised as duty, when the door creaked open. All eyes turned, and the world seemed to stop. I stepped inside, my cane striking the marble floor with a steady rhythm, my posture upright, my gaze calm yet cutting. Gasps rippled across the room, and then silence thickened, pressing on every chest. My daughter's cry broke the stillness, raw and disbelieving. She rushed forward, tears streaking her face, clutching me as though she feared I might vanish again. Across the table, my son-in-law froze, his complexion draining of color, his lips parting with no sound to offer. His performance of grief evaporated in an instant, replaced by the hollow stare of a man cornered. I did not raise my voice, for I had no need. Slowly, deliberately, I laid the heavy folder onto the polished wood, the thud echoing like a verdict. My hand lingered on the cover as I spoke, clear and measured. This is the truth. The weight of those words hung in the air, undeniable. The relatives who had moments before argued over villas and gold now sat rigid, their eyes darting between me and the trembling man they had nearly crowned as steward of my legacy. The mask had cracked, and the room felt the shift. I was no ghost, no victim of accident. I was alive, and I had come with proof sharper than any accusation. I opened the folder slowly, letting the silence stretch until every eye was fixed on me. The first page was a transcript, then the recording itself played from Richard's device. "Say hi to the crows." His voice, unmistakable, filled the room, echoing against the marble walls. Gasps broke out. My daughter's hand flew to her mouth while he sat rigid, eyes darting in panic. Next came the financial records, pages of debt statements, followed by the unraveled, stamped and filed, proving that every share of his company, every asset, had already been bound to me through law. His empire was no longer his. With a single signature, it belonged to me. Then I revealed the forged notary papers, the clumsy scan where seals were copied, signatures repeated with mechanical precision. Fraud gleamed from the page, but I was not finished. Richard laid down glossy photos, him arm in arm with another woman, time-stamped during the very hours he claimed to mourn me. Screenshots of tender texts and desperate messages to creditors piled on top, exposing both betrayal and ruin. Finally, the trustee's letter was read aloud, invoking the Slayer statute and the Bad Axe Clause. Anyone involved in attempted murder or fraud forfeits all inheritance rights. The words carried the weight of law, a blade sharper than any knife. The room shifted, relatives staring with wide eyes, whispers cutting like wind. He slumped in his chair, the mask torn away, the evidence stacked high as a wall around him. He stammered, his words broken, searching for a way to weave excuses out of thin air when the door opened again. A tall man entered, his presence heavy, his gaze cold. My son-in-law's face drained of blood. The private lender. For weeks this man had shadowed him, sending threats, demanding repayment within 72 hours. Panic flashed in his eyes. He thought the noose had tightened, but the stranger's lips curved into a thin smile as he set a folder on the table. "He works for me," I said evenly, watching realization shatter the last of his bravado. "Every debt you carry has been purchased. Not only your company, not only your lies, but even the loans you thought would crush you now belong to me." I leaned forward, my voice steady as steel. "Not only my life, but your debts are in my hands." His knees buckled, and he sank into the chair, his chest heaving. In that instant, the truth wrapped around him like chains. The law, the finances, his own reputation, every escape route was gone. A signal from Richard, and the waiting ended. The doors opened once more, and uniformed officers stepped inside. Their voices were firm, reading charges, attempted murder, insurance fraud, forgery. He leapt up, shouting hoarsely, "This is a setup, she is framing me." But before the echo faded, the recording played again. "Say hi to the crows." His own voice condemned him more powerfully than any judge. His protests died in his throat, replaced by the clink of handcuffs. The room watched in stunned silence as the man who thought he had inherited an empire was led away as nothing more than a criminal stripped of every mask. At first, my daughter rushed to shield him, her hands trembling as she tried to defend the man she thought she knew. But when Richard laid the photos on the table, showing him wrapped around another woman, and the messages where he sneered at her, calling her stupid, the last threads of her faith unraveled. Her face broke, her body shook as though her very soul had been torn open. Tears streamed down, blurring her vision until she turned to me, voice shattered. "Mother, I was wrong. I was blind to what he really was." I gathered her into my arms, not with reproach but with the tenderness I had saved for this moment. "You were deceived by a false love," I whispered, "but today you are free." Her sobs filled the room, but they no longer belonged to despair. They were the first cries of release. Meanwhile, the room witnessed a fall more brutal than any cliff. The officers pulled his hands behind his back and snapped the cuffs shut, the sound echoing like a gavel. The guests, relatives, and socialites who once praised him as the perfect son-in-law now whispered with disgust. All that charm, just a fraud, they murmured. To think he would kill his own mother-in-law for money. With the UCC lien enforced, his company was seized piece by piece. Assets were liquidated at auction, not to save him, but to repay debts that now flowed back to me, his mother-in-law. The irony was cruel, yet just. The mistress who once whispered promises vanished overnight, leaving no trace. Former creditors, eager once to press him, now turned their backs, uninterested in a man stripped of value. Headlines blared across society pages. A high society tragedy, detailing how a polished image collapsed under greed and crime. He was left with nothing, no money, no freedom, no dignity. The man who believed he had secured an empire through betrayal had in truth dug his own grave. When it was finished, I left the mansion that had echoed with shadows and deceit. I moved into a penthouse overlooking the Hudson, a place washed clean of whispers. The wide windows caught the sunset, painting the sky in copper and violet. I poured a glass of red wine, its warmth steadying my hand, and stood alone before the horizon. The river moved with quiet certainty, a mirror of the peace I had carved for myself. No more quarrels over inheritance, no more schemes festering in dark corners. Only the steady rhythm of my heart and the gentle breath of evening air. In my possession was not only 250 million in gold, but also something greater: my honor, my power, my control over my own life. Yet even as I sipped, a thought lingered like a shadow. I have won. But can victory heal the wound carved by betrayal? My daughter now lives apart from the man who nearly destroyed us both. With the stipend granted through the trust, she no longer depends on empty promises or forged securities. For the first time in years, she pays her own bills, makes her own choices, and walks into a future not dictated by someone else's debts. It is not easy. Healing never is. Some mornings she still cries, staring at the wreckage of what she once believed was love. Yet slowly, step by step, she is learning to stand on her own feet, to breathe without asking permission. Watching her, I understand that freedom wears many shapes. For me, it was reclaiming control of my legacy. For her, it is escaping the grip of a man who used affection as a chain. And in that, I see another form of peace. A mother cannot undo her child's pain, but she can open a door to light. In my heart, I know this truth. Keeping the gold was important. Keeping my honor was more important. But keeping peace within my soul is the hardest gift of all. Revenge gave me justice, but whether it brings happiness is another question entirely. So I leave it with you. Does revenge truly equal happiness, or does it simply clear the path toward a new life? If this story stirred something in you, take a moment to reflect. Think of your own dignity, your independence, and the quiet strength that grows with age. Share this tale with someone who needs to remember that control is never lost forever. And above all, believe that peace, though fragile, is always worth protecting.